Cool, awesome. Thanks for joining, guys. Okay, so we're gonna wait a little bit. I'll do a little bit of an intro of what I was thinking we could do. And ultimately, what I thought would be cool is to do something for just kind of beginners. So you didn't necessarily need a drum set or need any gear at all. So we can kind of, learn the basics without any gear. And if you're just bored and we all need to find something to do right now, then you can join along and play, and I'll kind of give you tips on how to do that and all that. Looks like more people are joining. Jason Traby, what's up? Maybe you'll learn some stuff today from me. This is fun. Cool. All right, so so basically just as an intro, this is just kind of like a basic drum lesson for beginners. Whether you've just started or just learned, that's what we're going to go through. What everyone kind of says when they are talking about learning how to play drums, or they tried to play and they get frustrated, it's like, well, how can you do all these things with your limbs at the same time? Like, how can you do 4 different things with your arms and your legs, and it's complicated and I can't do it and it's frustrating, and all of those things are kind of true. But the reality of it is that we use our 4 limbs in coordination all the time in our everyday life, and it's something that we do all the time. We just don't know it. If you drive a car, you're using at least 3 limbs. You're using 2 arms and your right leg. If you drive a stick shift, if you've ever driven a stick shift, you're using 4 limbs at the same time in coordination to achieve a goal. So we do it all the time. It's just it takes a while to learn, and it takes patience. And that's the big thing I think a lot of people end up struggling with, is they try it for a few days and they don't get better, or they try it for a week or whatever and they don't get better. And it just takes a lot of patience. And that's the one thing I say to people who are starting to learn drums, is that it's weird that in a way the drums are a really exciting instrument. They're fun, they're loud. But in order to learn the drums, you have to be willing to be patient and be willing to do a lot of tedious work. It's very tedious at times, and you have to kind of almost withhold from allowing yourself to get ahead of yourself in terms of what you're learning and how you're learning it. People want to sit down at the drums and play, just like a basic rock beat right away, and sometimes that's hard, but I think the reality of it is given some time and given just a little bit of patience with yourself, it's something you can learn. It's something you can do. It's really not that hard. Okay, so that out of the way. For people who are following along and don't have any drum set, or don't have any drums at all or whatever, my recommendation is sit at a table or a counter. A table would probably be better, but like your dining room table, use your right foot is the kick drum. So when you lift that up and push it down, that's your right foot. And the table is the hi-hat. So the table is up here like this. And then just use your knee, your left knee or your right knee if you're left-handed. Use the knee for the snare drum. So you're essentially doing the same activity, but all you need is really a chair and a table. So if you want to set up that way, that might help you kind of follow along with what I'm doing. So feel free to do that. The big thing for setup when you're setting up and playing, this is something I had to learn through experience and through a lot of sore backs after shows, is sit at the kit wherever you're sitting, figure out a way to set up your drums or however you're setting them up, and really think about your posture. Think about having your shoulders back and relaxed. Think about the lower part of your back kind of pushed forward. Try to sit sort of on the edge of your throne instead of really, your butt shouldn't be sitting on the back of your throne. Your butt should really be kind of sitting on the edge. Just those kind of basics of thinking about your posture when you're playing. It is better for your back. It's better for your body. You'll feel when you're playing for long periods of time, you'll feel better when you're done. And B, I think you play a lot better when your posture is balanced and powerful rather than like this. This is how I kind of used to play, actually. Like my shoulders are really down low like this. And now I've really tried to kind of like push this lower part of my back, up closer to the snare, get my shoulders back and relaxed, and just try to envision like a straight line through my spine and through the throne. This might seem like kind of a dumb detail, but trust me, if you are learning to play drums now, let's say you're a kid and you're learning to play, and you happen to end up with a career in playing drums or whatever, or you want to play for the rest of your life and you love it, playing like this will save you a lot of backache, and it'll also help you play better. It'll keep your kind of mind more engaged. So that's posture. The next thing is, so basically I got the first thing we need to talk about when learning how to play drums is just counting to 4. There's kind of like that drummer joke, when my kids are doing math, like right now they're doing, home learning. And I just say, hey man, when it comes to math, I only count to 4. And that's kind of true, because that's like, in my job, I count to 4 and that's it. So that's basically it. So it's just, 4 beats in a measure, 4/4 time. And so when we're playing drums, we want to think in 4s. So the first thing I would do is take your right hand, and your right hand would be if you're at home at a table, your right hand is playing on the table. And then if you're right-handed at home on a drum set, your right hand's on the hi-hat. If you're left-handed, then your left hand might be on the hi-hat. And so we just want to do something very basic, like go very slow and count to 4 and just play along. So it's just you could just sit here and do this for as long as you want to kind of get lost in your thoughts, but just like think 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can go even slower than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's like the first step of any sort of like basic rock drum set, drum beat, is that constant, it's this quarter note, a constant just 4 count on the hi-hat. And so we do that until we get comfortable. If you're just starting and just beginning to be a drummer and never done it before, just practice 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's first step 1, right? So we think in 4s. The hi-hat is hitting on all 4s, and so this is when throwing in the next limb is where it can get tricky sometimes. And so depending on how we want to start, some people like to learn adding in the snare second, and some people like to learn adding the kick drum in the second limb. I'm going to just start off just doing the snare. So when you add the snare to your hi-hat, you're always adding the snare on 3. Just to start, just to be basic, you're adding the snare on 3. So it's just like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you can do that right off the bat, that's awesome. So, and if you do it and you kind of have to think about it and you're struggling a little bit, all you have to do is just play slow and be patient and get to the point where you can do this without even thinking about what you're doing, right? So, how like we drive a car, we don't really even have to think about using our left hand to do the signal and using our right hand to shift gears or the steering wheel or whatever. We don't even think about it because we just do it all the time. And that's how ultimately you want to get. With every step, you want to learn it to the point where you don't even have to think about it. When I'm playing shows sometimes and I'm playing along, sometimes I play the best when I'm just totally thinking about something else. I'm not even thinking about what I'm doing. I'm not thinking about, the next part's coming up. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about sports, or I'm thinking about whatever, something going on. And it just sort of lets you kind of get lost. And so that's when you've learned it enough to move on, right? So if you need to really think about this 1, 2, 3, 4 on the hi-hat with just your right hand, then you just got to keep doing that until you can zone out and not worry about it. Then we add the snare, So that's always on the 3. So just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if that's too fast for you, you can go even slower. You slow it down as much as you need to. Don't ever feel bad about going slow. That's okay. I'd rather you be slow and consistent and really feeling like you're learning it than pushing yourself to play faster. Faster doesn't matter, okay? So once you get comfortable with that, the next basic step is adding in the 3rd limb. And the 3rd limb in this case is my right foot, which is controlling, which is hitting the foot pedal into the kick drum, right? So I'll just do it step by step. So I'm doing the hi-hat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm gonna add the snare, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, drum, 1, 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. And that's it. And if you need to go slower, it can be 4, 2, 4, 2, right? So slow as you need to go in order to feel like you're getting comfortable. And let's say you throw in that kick drum and you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4. You're starting to play the kick drum with the snare too. That's totally normal. That a lot of people, it's just one of those things where we kind of separate our limbs. And so if you do that, don't get frustrated with it. It's just part of learning and separating those limbs. And the other way I could say, like if you wanted to do the kick drum by a step, you could do the hi-hat on the 4s on the hi-hat, and then do the kick drum always on 1, and not do the snare. So you can get kind of used to going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can kind of build it. You can get the kind of building blocks going. Usually it's pretty easy for people to get the 2 limbs. It's when you throw in that 3rd limb that gets tricky. And so all I would say is just be patient. Just do each of those steps. Do the hi-hat and be patient with yourself and count to 4 and then add that second limb and just be patient and slow it down. If you need to go could even be too fast. As slow as you need to go, as slow as you need to slow it down to feel like you're processing it and doing the beat correctly, right? So that's the basics of just learning that's the basics of just learning the first beat that any drummer would learn when they get on the kit. And the thing I would just say, kind of getting into the more immediate stuff, intermediate stuff. So once you kind of get to the point where you can play that basic beat and you can play some real basic things on the kit, what I would suggest is to, as soon as you can get comfortable with playing basic stuff, try to work to a metronome. That's really key. As soon as you can feel comfortable doing it, try to play to either, you can call it a metronome or a click track. That's something that I had to learn like in the middle of making records with Jimmy Eat World. The first half of Static Prevails, when we recorded it, I didn't know how to play to a click track. I showed up at the studio and I was all excited. It's like, man, I'm going to crush it. And I was like really confident. And I got into the studio. We recorded the first half of the record, I think in the summer, and then we recorded the second half of the record in December. So the first half went really poorly, and it was super frustrating. Mark Trombino was really frustrated with me. He wasn't mean, but he was just like, come on, man, like, let's go. And at that point, I should have known how to play to a click. That was a really kind of eye-opening experience for me. I went home and spent like all fall drilling to a click as much as possible, getting used to playing to a click. And then the second half of The second half of the album I played, and it was like night and day. Like you can even hear it on the album. Like go listen to Static Prevails, and half the album, my tempos are super sketch, and the other half, it's like rock solid. So, so if you can do this early, like before you're making, you're making records in expensive studios and wasting your time and your money, get in as early as you can to do that, because it will save you a lot of time and effort. It'll save you. It just kind of gets you ready to be a drummer. If you want to play in a band, you got to learn how to do that. If you're playing like in a school band or a school orchestra or something like that, you got to be able to watch the conductor. And the conductor's kind of like your click track. So you got to play your parts. You got to, like we're talking about here, it gets so complicated with all the limbs. You get lost in it, right? You're like, well, you get so focused on what you're doing, but then you have to remember, oh man, I got to play with all these other people. And it's about developing that awareness of playing to something else and not just being lost in like what you're doing here. And that also comes with, just like I said, that comfortability of playing a part and being comfortable to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore, where you have room in your brain to think about other things. Just like when you're driving your car, you're not thinking about, oh man, I got to turn left, I got to take my left hand, and I got to, do the signal. I got to shift and reverse because I'm going backwards now. Like you don't have to think out loud about those things. You don't have to think about it. You just do it. So it's similar to that. Any questions? I haven't really been listening to any of the questions or reading any of the questions, but is everyone hearing everything okay? Tips on how to do eighth notes on one hand and triples in another is impossible. That's probably hard for me too. I'm not even going to try and teach that. Okay, cool. Everyone's got me. All right, well, that's good. So the other intermediate thing that's sort of like kind of one of those next things when you start to really kind of get comfortable with the basics that I like to talk about is it's the metronome, like getting comfortable playing with the metronome. And the other thing is really thinking about how you're striking the drum and how the drum sounds when you hit it. And when you're just learning and you're just kind of a beginner and you have no idea what you're doing and you haven't played before, I don't really care. Like hit the drum however you want. Don't really worry about that. But as you get comfortable and as you start playing drums more and more, and you can start to grow and develop the sort of intermediate skills, you really need to start thinking about how you're hitting the drum, trying to hit the drum. Especially when you're doing kind of like a rock beat that really needs that consistent snare sound, you want to try and hit the drum right in the middle of the drum, right? There are times where I play not the middle of the drum, but that's like on purpose and it's for a special need, right? I do a lot of what are called ghost notes. And so ghost notes are basically like you do a basic beat like we were learning. So let's say you get your basic beat, you go. So ghost notes is when you fill in the eighth note rest with, or actually a 16th note rest with just little quiet snare hits, So, and I usually do those snare hits like off to the side, right? So instead of hitting the in the middle, I'm kind of more hitting it like right on the edge, right? So that'd be like. So the reason why I like to separate where those are hitting is because I want that 2 and 4 on the snare to sound big and powerful, and I want the ghost notes to kind of sound, like small and sort of almost like it's kind of almost back in your subconscious. And if you listen to our albums, you'll hear me play ghost notes all the time, like Lucky Denver Mitt is ghost notes. So that's all ghost notes. Those little notes in the middle. So without the ghost notes, that drum beat is. Big Casino, Sweetness, all those I use ghost notes all the time. I love those. Maybe I can do another lesson about just those because they're really fun. But in terms of just kind of like the basic and intermediate steps, you don't need to worry about the ghost notes. Those will come later, but they are kind of fun to learn and will help you, especially when you're kind of writing music with band. If you're in a band and you're writing music, sometimes those ghost notes can really help you as a drummer give certain parts a kind of energy that they might need. And it's been a big tool for me, so I'm really glad that I was taught those. So I guess, the other thing I would really just like to reiterate, and I talked about this at the beginning, is just be patient. It's one limb at a time. And when you're feeling comfortable at a stage and you feel like you can add something, and if you add it and it doesn't go well, that's okay, right? It's maybe you're just not as comfortable as you think you are, right? We often feel like, oh, well, this is easy, I can do this. And then, throwing that right foot and it's like it all falls apart, and that's okay, right? Just go slow. Take it slower if you're having a hard time, and just be patient with yourself. It's like anything else. And if you do it for a little bit, and you can even do it like you don't need the drums, you don't need to annoy your parents or your siblings or your neighbors. Like I said at the beginning, if you have a table and a chair, your table can be your hi-hat, your lap can be, your knee can be your snare, and you can just use that foot just on the ground. You can practice it. It's the same thing, right? It's just getting that coordination happening. So anyway, I think that's it for the lesson part. If anyone has any questions or suggestions for if they want to learn, if they want me to cover anything else in the future. Let's see here. What tips would you give to writing a drum part to the song? That's a really good question. To me, as a drummer, writing drum parts for a song, the most important thing I listen to is the vocal. If I'm doing a fill, I don't want to do it over the vocal. If I'm doing something kind of flashy and fun, I don't want to take attention away from the vocal. And also, not only to not step on the vocal with stuff that I could do or not do, the vocal oftentimes gives me a cue for you almost like want to sing the vocal part with your drums sometimes. And that can really kind of help you support the vocal and support the song in a way that can be creative and different, but it's not always like, the obvious thing to do. And so, I personally like simple and consistent, and providing a foundation for other instruments to do cool stuff. And for the vocal, our band is a very guitar heavy, and where the guitars are very important and the vocals are very important. So I just take my cue from that and just try to keep it simple and not step on the toes of those other things going on. And if there is a moment where I can interject or do something to kind of give that part an energy or stuff like that. The other thing I like to do when thinking about songwriting is thinking about how can I develop my part as the song goes on? What can I do differently in the second verse that I didn't do in the first verse? Or what can I do differently in that last chorus that I didn't do in the first part in the first chorus? And a lot of that is about dynamics, about volume, right? So if I'm doing like the open hi-hat on the first chorus, I might want to do a little crash ride on the last chorus. Just something simple, basic like that. Like just how do I step up and make each part sound a little different and more exciting as the song goes on? As a band, you should be thinking about that, but even if each individual member, like what kind of little thing can I throw in that didn't happen at the beginning of the song that keeps that listener engaged? Let's see here. How's the process for composing the drum? Okay, I basically just did that. I don't write anything down. When I'm writing a part, I do it all by memory. People would ask me like, well, how do you count out the end of Pass the Baby or a weird part or Goodbye Sky Harbor? And I don't count at all. I just play it, so I learn it, I memorize it, and I play it, and I'm not really counting. Ideally, to me, when you're playing, you shouldn't be thinking. You should just be playing. And if you are thinking about something, think about something other than what you're doing, because it's just, I feel like you play better. You start to tend, when you overthink about how you're playing, it's easy to lose it. And it happens, there's certain nights where I think I'm overthinking. Sometimes it happens on little weird parts that I freak out about because I blew it in sound check, and then like, oh, here it comes. And because I'm thinking about it and because I'm like freaking out about it, sure enough, I blow it. So just try to relax and kind of let your mind check out. Anyone else have any other questions? Man, there's only 91 people watching this. I probably shouldn't even do it. Can't even get it over 100. Now even more people are leaving. Look at this. Okay, well, maybe that just means I need a kind of... Oh, wait, here, someone... let's see here. I see down the road, once you get through basics, mics you use at home, cymbals. Okay, yeah, I could talk a little bit about the cymbals that I use. This is my home. This is my living room. I've played drums in here before. It's really reflective in here. I'm sure you can tell, like, when I play it, it sounds kind of echoey. It sounds cool, though. It has like a cool energy. The reflective acoustics kind of I like, but I have to play really quietly. Like, I can't play here the way I would normally play at a show. So normally I don't have any now, but I wouldn't like. So I normally play a Zildjian Super 5A, which is kind of it's a little bit larger, on the larger side, and like for this setting, I would probably just play a regular 5A because having the smaller sticks, the drums don't project as much. Like, you really don't need a lot in here. Like, I can play really quietly and really lightly, and it just it sounds on recordings that I'm playing really loud, but I'm not. So I like to use really dry cymbals. These are Zildjian Corot hats. This is a Constantinople 16-inch crash, really small, dark. And then this is a Constantinople ride. So I go with really dry, dark cymbals in this room because it's really reflective. That's kind of like, that's something I think about when we record, when we're even in a venue sometimes there's certain stages are really, really reflective and bright. And so I'll put some tape on the cymbals, or I'll pick just darker cymbals. And here it's like the maximum darkness. Like, I'm using an aluminum snare, which is like the darkest metal. I'm using mahogany, small mahogany shelled drums that are very dark. So that's kind of what I think about. I do that because the room is so bright. Let's see here. I'll do one more question. Can you give a gear rundown of what you tour with? I would do that. I don't have that with me now, but I can do that in the future. I think that would be kind of cool. Is Closer is kind of a hard song to play, just because it's hard to keep it consistent. Let's see here. Okay, well, I don't know. Talk about using your floor tom. I use my floor tom a lot. I use it sometimes for my drinks. Like, I put the drink right here. But this one actually sounds really good. It's a 14-inch, and it's a great drum. But yeah, floor toms are important. Let's see here. Well, okay, this is my last question that I'll answer. This is asking me what's my favorite cymbal I've played, and so Jeremy from Q Drums, who makes the drums that I play live. Back in the day, probably mid 2000s, he teched for me on a one-off gig, and now he's a tech for Dominic for Muse, and I think back then he was teching for Nine Inch Nails, and he's an awesome dude, a great drum builder, one of the most knowledgeable guys of drums that I know. He told me about this cymbal that Zildjian made, and it was a 24-inch ride that's called the Orchestral Special Selection Ride. And so as soon as he told me about it, I was like, oh man, I got to try this. So I got one from Zildjian and I started using it, and they since then stopped making them. And it's really a shame because this ride I've used in so many songs. It's my main ride for probably every album since I got it, from like probably Big Casino or Chase This Light on. I use that ride all the time on every record. It's the one cymbal. I actually use it as a crash cymbal in Gotta Be Somebody's Blues, and it's like one of my favorite crash cymbal sounds we've ever done on that song. So it's just a special cymbal that I never tour with it. I never take it out of the studio. I wouldn't even bring it home just because, I don't know, my kids would probably like write a Sharpie on it or something. But yeah, it's a 24-inch Zildjian Orchestral Special Selection. So if you can find a 24 or a 22 on eBay or whatever, get it, because it's really, really a great cymbal. All right, guys. Well, I will try to post this up somewhere else. And for people who missed it, I'll try that. But if I fail to do that, I've never done this before. So if I fail to do that, then we'll just do it again some other time and cover some other subjects that you guys want to hear about. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys later.